gesture to open a concerto. Hello. Grieg's concerto opening remains one of the most magic openings in all the Romantic era concerti. And God forbid there are so many that have striking openings, Tchaikovsky's and all. But this one, while heroic in the sense of the Romantic era of European understanding of the term, at the same time in the minor mode, gives that sense of dropping instead of rising, which is towards victory. In the terms of militaristic way of the heroism of the 19th century, galloping on a horse and going to victory. It is not which he does at the very coda, but still drops. But in the very opening, it is descending. Usually the climax is always rising. It's operatic, it's dramatic, it's the rhetoric of Romanticism. You have the Liszt Sonata that rises these leaps of octaves, and Tchaikovsky's concerto that sense of elevation compared to the Grieg concerto, which starts as a wounded hero attitude. Then you have this theme that is most intimate, whispered, almost a confession. With a hope in relative major. And I think it's important to maintain that quality of its restraint compared to this exuberant opening. Schubert starts the Arpeggione Sonata in the same A minor. With the same intimacy of the middle of the keyboard, or middle range expression of intimate whispered thought. Mozart's K310 Sonata, written at Mozart's mother's death in Paris, is also A minor in the middle of the keyboard. You have A minor, middle of the keyboard, Chopin, Mazurka. This other Mazurka. Because it talks directly to the human psyche after the burst of the opening, a very dramatic effect, really, of the... to have this. Of course, we know that Grieg often referred himself to modeling his concerto to Schumann's A minor concerto, which also starts with a burst of the piano in chordal explosions, also dropping, though by steps, of Another perfect cadence demonstration. I don't think that necessarily can read too much into this modeling on the Schumann Concerto for Grieg. I think Grieg combines the playful, the singing, and the heroic in the most harmonious and restrained way. For instance, bringing the second theme. To play the piece. It just talks to you so easily. It's just almost like a hugging friend. I enjoy so much sharing it with you too. And the fact is that after the initial burst and the first, almost like a chorale theme, where the harmonies and the melodies and the rhythm are all in the same pattern, almost as if a heartbeat. Almost like a call. Minimalistic melodization compared to the dance. I can see the elves dance in some kind of mythological Norwegian story. Grace notes all kind of playfully intertwine. I mean, sometimes you have to hear it as a grace note, almost together, or really separate, articulate. That would be so funny if it was written with 16th notes throughout. But in fact, the 16th note before the 8th note dotted, well, the quarter note staccato, is there to playfully decorate the beats. Appoggiatura, 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 tira, 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 tira. And the second statement that in fact completes the first chorale theme is a deeply lyrical rise for once after the introduction. And then one more. I find that Brahmsian writing in many aspects. He has Brahms' Rhapsody. And here, that ascension of the melodic fourth terms of the interval, not the chord. It's almost questioning us, but why there? But why there? Or but why anywhere? Or something. It questions us. What? Where? And each reproduction of the pattern is another question that doesn't answer the question before. Philosophers answer with a question. And then soothing. And then reproduced. So these very short portions of each character of atmosphere of humanity and the opening. All that means that, in fact, I think Grieg incorporated a lot of the effects of the expressions of the Romantic Hero Concerto in very, in fact, succinct, but really reaching to the heart of it, of our psyche. The expression. He doesn't go around, he just goes right away, like touches the target of its emotional expression. And so we have this quick succession of emotions which are so intense, but at the same time so diverse, and at the end completing. And when the second theme arrives for the lyrical aria, is soothing relative major naturally, almost unmeasured, or apparently so nonchalantly placed, a quintuplet and all. The melodic line is a dialogue with an echo, which would be us, the listeners, or the performer as an active listener. And immediately, this little echo of acquiescing. Oh yes, we understand, we feel for you. Oh, but I sing my song about this or that. And the answer, oh yes, we accept or we agree. It's almost like a Greek choir commenting the antique theater plays. But it's all in the piano part while it's a concerto. It's not a sonata or played like this. Sounds like it actually. And the orchestra does have big tutti, but most of the, when piano solo plays, the orchestra is more the Klangteppich, as the Germans say, the sound carpet, the harmonization over under the that kind of soothing feeling, coating feeling of the harmonization, especially in a relative major, in the strings, that holds and warmly, really, yes, enlights from inside out the melodic line through the harmonization. And then starts a long rising section, but by steps in a sequence. there is the big symphonic tutti that concludes the piano part and connects to the development by the orchestra going. That's fantastic to have a mini Tchaikovsky symphony like in the tutti at the end of the exposition of the Grieg Concerto. That's the fourth symphony by Tchaikovsky. Tchaikovsky, Brahms. Repeated notes in the brass calling in a almost alarming, not almost, totally alarming way. What am I saying? Almost. It's an understatement. I think that it's inevitable that every artwork, as timeless and universal as it is to us, because in a way outside of its time frame capsule of its own context, it travels with us in today's life, which is in a way anachronical by the effect that it's written by somebody dead from a time period which is no more. Doesn't matter because it's present while we play it, and the fact that we have to just accept, understand, and let it bathe in its own contexture, which is Tchaikovsky, Brahms, Schumann, Liszt, Chopin, the great romantics of the early mid-19th century, and Grieg towards the end of the 19th century to the almost beginning where he died, early 20th century, is sort of not only in that same flow of events. I mean, he's also inspired. I mean, come on, who cares who inspired who? They are inspired, they're vibrant, those people. They came up with expressions that developed deep from inside their beings. Would it be because of their contextual situation where they are in this or that culture, country, folklore, background, understanding? I mean, of course, they're not human beings outside of their time frame, but they arise above their condition when they leave us a work of art. While it is rooted in their time period, it is timeless because in a way it is more than themselves, or in a way besides themselves, and they leave it for us after them. And while they were alive, it was part of them. And I find that this kinship, cousinage with this other romantic era piano virtuosic, heroic concerti, where the piano is the orchestra's symphonic version of Army of One, that can compete with the instrumental power of the time that developed to compete in sheer volume with the energy of the group of the orchestra, but then psychologically it becomes the heroism of the lonely hero versus the group. And sometimes they complete when the orchestra coats the melodic line or the thematic expression in a tight dialogue. You have a little bit of this, but most of the time is the sheer symphonic moment, as it is here in the tutti after the exposition ended. And And so when the development is to start, he retrieves to the intimacy of the opening. So, and the most intimate instrument plays the theme, the flute. The one that projects the least powerfully compared to the sharp oboe sound or the wider clarinet projection. But the flute, while has a beautiful resonance, also has something very close to the mouth. No reed, no mouthpiece. You can feel the flow of the air directly in the pipe, and then you hear the sound come out like a singer. It's almost, but at the same time, it doesn't project loud. And the pianist, who is the soloist, the heroic opening, becomes a harp accompanying, after the flute, the French horn. It sounds like some kind of hunt music. To take in account the importance composers give to the ranges, the flute, the horn. And this is not so just because of the range of the specific instrument, it's because the instrument's range translates the psychology. The flute in the high register is some kind of a female voice, it's like singing perhaps a girl or a young child. And the answer in the French horn is something more mature, more adult, mezzo or tenor or, baritone. And so, nothing but in this evocation of the first theme in the beginning of the development, Grieg uses it as a dialogue between two parts. And the piano, which is in the forefront of the stage with the orchestra, has to blend, melt, merge into the action of the solo instrument, but the solo instrument is sitting few rows, if not many meters away, because of the disposition of the orchestra, and there is all of a sudden, almost as if in jazz bands when they do, I would like to have the flutist walk few steps, come and play the evocation of the theme next to the pianist as an aparté, as a moment of just a duo. And then the French horn player would come too to do the part of his or hers. But of course they sit, they don't walk, they sit still, as I meant to say. And therefore the projection of their sound goes over the acoustics of the piano into the hall, but the pianist very often on stage from experience doesn't hear these solos as clearly in the recording sessions where microphone mixing tables allow to even enhance that intimacy that is unnaturally heard as a close-up compared to the audience, which receives it as the orchestrations mix by the composer's proportions, just like tasting the food of a chef who made exact proportions of ingredients within the sauce. I like all these food analogies as well. Because I find that the orchestration is a miracle of balance that is imagined by a composer silently before it's performed. When it's performed, it becomes alive, and then the conductor, the acoustics, the tone engineer, the audience, the different ways of hearing it, put it alive, bring it alive, make it happen. Goes to our ear test buds, and we go, oh, I can taste this, I can hear this, don't hear enough of that. Fascinating. All these aspects of the comprehension of the texture. And after this, he goes exactly half tone higher in F minor. This could drift forever. clever, it's so pleasing. Slight chromatic drops in the harp of the piano part, imitation of harp, and this dialogue between the singing and the almost consoling second voice. Again, the echo. He's into that, like in the first he, in a dramatic effect of operatic style, interrupts this soothing opening of the second section, development of the first movement, with this thunderstorm, Sturm und Drang, F sharp minor arpeggio. And again, the piano literally plays piano. Forte piano, forte! Piano! Almost playful, forte with intensity and expression. Intensity. It doesn't say playful there, really, I overstated. It could be, but then it's perhaps overreading into it. Still the second theme. Well, anyway, all these expressions of lyricism are not always the second theme. Sometimes the second theme and the dancing theme can combine in their expression. And then again the piano answers dropping. Heroic ending, but in the sense of victory. Here it's a painful. 2 against 3 with the alarming trumpets, like Fourth Symphony Tchaikovsky, as I mentioned at the beginning. In this descent, it becomes even more painful because you realize that the expression of the burst of emotion is in the high notes. Every drop is it's an acquiescence to say, okay, I accept that I'm not going to be victorious. And so the wounded hero element here, I think, symbolically comes again at play. No matter how dramatic and evolved in the romantic sense of that heroism that is forward, driven, passionate, Florestan in Schumann, the expression of utter and unadulterated emotional involvement into life, into conviction, into feelings, into combination of all of these. It's not lukewarm, it's all or none. And this kind of romantic era, breaking a lot of its classical era and Baroque era before itself, formal coding rules, is there to express at its fullest the inner intense emotions that humans feel, regardless of their differences of culture from Northern Europe, Southern Europe, or other parts of the world. Here it's a burst that is so universal in the expression that I think everybody identifies with it in the different audience, from Asia to Europe to Americas to Africa to anywhere. It talks to us about our yearnings, our hopes. That's what it is, I think, makes it more universal than only placed in its romantic era area, time zone, I was going to say, but it is. And this impression that the music of the piece is about a struggle and then an acceptance of our condition. The art of the subtle bridges. aspect of things in Grieg is very much to be appreciated. I think sometimes underestimated, because by making it so discreet, so almost seamless, the emotional energy, the blossoming expression of the thrust of emotion that comes out of the different character of the themes, the first, the singing of the second, the moving flow, cradling waves, and the playfulness. By these very subtle bridges that are so discreet that the listener has just the time to catch his emotional, psychological breath to connect to the next emotional intensity. And he doesn't try to do intense bridges or complex bridges or long bridges in terms of he doesn't attach importance to distract our emotional hearing from the essence of things. Is like the essence of a fragrance, the essence of a taste of a fruit. You don't have to spend your time peeling it. He presents it to you right away peeled, and you go, oh, this smell, oh, this taste, oh, this expression, oh, this reminiscence, oh, this emotion, this reminds me, this brushes me. You feel like you're constantly only at the heart, directly targeted to the heart of the expression. And that's, in that sense, I think the Grieg concerto is succinct in its length compared to Brahms' second or Rachmaninoff third, which are just amazing romantic concerti in terms of their intensity and length. Here it is intense, but in fact very restricted in length. And the cadenza, in the end of the first movement, I would say is almost disproportionately long compared to the succinct formal expression of the right heart targeted thematic materials, because in a way it becomes like a sonata within the concerto. It's not just the fermata, which is usually what the cadenza is supposed to be, the extended moment of virtuosity. It becomes almost as if the cadenza in Grieg's concerto written by him is not only the recapitulation of all what we've heard in the first movement thematically, which by the way it is, it's also as if he gives us a sonata version of the concerto's first movement. Sort of like, already the concerto is, I consider formally, very restrained in its length. It doesn't go to external lengths, extraordinary lengths, but the cadenza does dwell into it. And I must say that when you open all this drifting, Neapolitan 6, of course, for darker mood. German sixth to bring us to the theme. So talk about the man who does such a short bridges through the whole first movement to let the music just exist and not all its surroundings in terms of formal aspect. And here in the cadenza, you take most of the cadenza to start the theme, to first state it. It is virtuosic also, but I think psychological too, in terms of delaying and manipulating the listeners. It's like a suspense film or a book where you turn pages and you hope to find out what happened to the hero, because it is breathtaking and constantly driving you from one spot to the other. There is not an empty moment or a moment of comfort. And I find that the introduction of this cadenza is extremely long in its entrance, but I think that is what he probably that mirrored also in part of the Schumann Concerto Cadenza. Because by the time the Schumann Concerto Cadenza starts, it also has this introduction. Alarming trill, not embellishing trill a la Baroque, even if it's written, notated as a trill, which is a Baroque notation. It's more a vibrato, incandescent fire of emotion, spiritually, emotionally, under which you hear the theme of the Schumann opening of the first theme of the concerto's first movement. And that's exactly what Grieg reaches also in his climax of the cadenza, when he reaches that element with the alarming trill in the right hand. But to go back to the introduction, because of the comparison of the to A minor concerti cadenza opening of Schumann and Grieg, not to compare them to see who imitates how and what, because it's self-explanatory. I mean, you can hear it, you don't need me to say it. And in any case, I don't need to say anything. I just reflect the fact that I find as a performer such beautiful cousinage. That's exactly what I find between the two concerti. It's almost like if they say, oh, please, I love your concerto, and this is how I love it, and they play their own, and they write their own, and that's what Grieg did, I think, in response to Schumann, for his own sake also, and not only in response to Schumann. I find that to be a beautiful homage in many aspects. Hopefully he didn't do all that. It was so liberating, I must say. It's like Grieging forever. Well, on the way in this improvisation, it was a lot of Liszt as well, not to mention Brahms, and in a way ingredients, but they don't make the taste of it. They only contribute. So it's easy to dwell over aspects of the taste, but only Grieg knew how much of what ingredient to use. Oof. That was something when he chooses to exponentially expand the emotional expression of the keyboard in all the ranges of the fortepiano. And roaring or whispering, the roar and the whisper, the trill, the tremblance, the tremolo, the chromaticism, the deep down chromatics like he does in his climax. It's like being in an emotional bath of Grieg's expression, in which all the free-flowing feelings of human expression are unadulterated in their flow. And I find that to be also very liberating as well for the performer, as well as for the listener, because you feel like the two, the listener and the performer, are in a mutually arousing stage and state. And then this situation rises. You can read that in novels, you can see that in theater plays, you can feel that without to be alive in the performance in the movies or on your screen in the film at home. It's that there is a build-up of something that drives you. That is the human passions. That's what it is. The arousal of the human passions. And I find that when a music like Grieg's Concerto manages to deliver such an incredibly down to the point for each of the emotions, fulfillment of this expression and sharing with the audience, it becomes immediately the audience and the listeners, therefore with the performers, become one. There is no one reciting and the other one's listening. I think it's difficult to listen to the Grieg Concerto as a listener passively. Inevitably you're drawn to enter in the action, nothing but by the spiritual connection and therefore the storytelling that happens between the notes without lyrics. It's fantastic. And I think the performers feel that instant bond with the audience that a few concerti do provide you as a performer to feel. I think that instant bond is very striking in the psychological connection with the audience for this concerto. And so when he does his own trills with double and three notes, you feel like he drives the trill into a further dimension, not just two notes, but chords. And so you feel like you have to express it to its fullest, while technically you have to be careful to be precise. That's the real problem and challenge teaching this kind of very intensely driven music, is that if you get as a performer to let yourself go too much to it, you surrender to all what it calls you for, then you don't control the weight, the precision, the tip of the finger, because only the tips play. But of course you have to have a relaxed arm and shoulders, and then support of the palm and precise articulation of the fingers, so that you can retrieve and sculpt, organize, shape of every element, from the dance to the singing, to the statement of the first theme, or to the moments of burst. Precisely chords, you have to have a good imprint of the hand fingers in order to not play the other than the ones that are chosen, with white and black keys according to the disposition topography of the terrain. So if you play them just sheerly loud, you're going to put too much weight and you might crush your support of the palm for the tip of the fingers, which of course you want to avoid. And in order to avoid that and have precision over power, then you might play with a restrained amount of weight, because you want to secure the imprint of the chords in this case. So in other words, to play clean is to hold back in terms of muscular energy, but at the same time, when the music is fortissimo, dramatic, his cadenza this time, of course, the orchestral imitation of the piano, of the tremolos of the waves of the arpeggios in the left hand, and the tremolo, but inside the right hand, I meant, the octaves, and the progressive crescendo, because it's easy to play, for the example, loud throughout. It's like scream, scream, but you have to start under dynamically. Top and drop in the left hand independently of the melodic rise, the step-by-step melodic rising of the thematic material. So then you have to plan it, because if you plan it too much, then you don't have the drive. It's like shut down the engine. Now you have to keep it constantly boiling, constantly warm, but under control, so that you release the full energy at the peak. Wisely repedal. Fortissimo. But you cannot play piano before too much, nor can you play fortissimo throughout, because even if the music rises by steps and in terms of the harmonic progression, you still have to be precise for the imprint of your fingers on the keyboard, but also for the dramatic progressive rise of the emotion. Well, if it was easy, it wouldn't be Grieg concerto, because one thing is to play pragmatic, one thing is to play hectic, and the other thing is to play both. By using best of both, control, organize, and release progressively until you reach the inevitable in Grieg, and there are many climaxes. And as you noticed again at the climax of the cadenza, he redrops. And he restates the theme. And this is since the beginning. And here, I think it is an element to take in account in your interpretation. the industry of playing it is to manage the clean, clear, precision imprints of the intervals. The weight management is very important, not to get stiff in the octaves when there are so many, but use the wrist in order to maintain the weight of the projection of the sound, generous and not angry. If you just use forearm to secure the octave or the chord. All these things are teachable, and they are to be organized according to each singular performer, a student in the case when you teach, as morphology. How long the arm, how long the legs. I mean, all this is to do with how you apprehend, because the keyboard is one size fits all. It doesn't shrink or adapt to the body, but you have to extract the sounds with all the energy that you have, either if you're tall or short, long arms or long fingers or stretched fingers or not stretched enough. You have to stretch to his chords, you have to play his notes, you have to play his dynamic markings, and you have to play his tempo markings. Other than that, you find the help of a teacher to help you how to extract these same sounds through your body morphology, without to hurt yourself, without to get the tendinitis, without to just pound on the octaves and hurt your arms. This is, I think, as a teacher, my greatest attention given to how to practice repetitively without to hurt yourself, because that's when you wear the most your tendons. Also, how to practice with logical articulations and gestures that make you practice only the junctures that matter, like the dropping of the third. When you drop from a black key to a white key, it's like opening a drawer if you want. And when you play from two white keys in a row, you just slide on the side. But when you go from... So you have managing this dropping for the third from a black to white key. You want to make sure that you raise the wrist at this point to make up for that hole, because between the black and the white key there is a drop. And not to drop with the wrist and the dropping of the key. But then rise, adds an accent to the next white key, which you will play, because it's G, E, C, E with a G sharp. Of course, you can always wonder, what if he had written it in a key that had more black keys or more white keys according to the display of the keyboard, but you don't choose. He chose the tonality. He chose the notes. You have to choose how to find the best way to approach, to organize, to anticipate, to gesture, hug the piece. Gesture hug. That's an interesting concept. But it is a way to anticipate so that you don't hurt yourself playing it, and you don't fight it playing it. And it doesn't hurt you practicing it, and you play it with generous energy and not with angry banging on the keyboard, which can become the case after long practicing and not playing clean and getting frustrated and perhaps at some point impatient, which is to say how early that comes in practicing. We all know too early. But the fact is that practicing is the secret to playing. The problem is that most of us don't know how to, because what we do is just repeat until we know it. It's like hit yourself against the wall until you break the wall, but that then gives you pain in the head. So you have to find ways to organize it wisely. So fingerings, articulations, gesture, position, disposition, distance from the keyboard. The body, the pedaling, the phrasing, the articulation. I mean, all these are ingredients of piano playing anyway. There's nothing special. It's just that you have to find how to adapt them so that you can play each section to its fullest at his demand. And I find that when the piece is so emotionally exponential, it's easy to give one's fullness of sound for each section. And then when you hear it throughout, you feel like you've just screamed throughout in terms of artistic projection of the sound, rhetorical, theatric. you have to find how to define the soundscapes. And when it comes the second time, he chooses to have the second theme again in major after the exposition in the relative C major. Because it maintains that feeling of hope, which is part of the heroism too, which is dramatic, romantic, minor, chromatic, and descending, and dropping in his case, whenever the melodic line of the second theme is the hope. And that hope is here in relative major in the opening, but here in the recapitulation in the principal key, which is A minor. So he doesn't choose to have the second theme in A minor. Actually, I find it quite interesting to have this minor key expressing what in major represented a sense of hope, even if that's psychologically very, very, very rudimentary what I'm saying, because it's more subtle than that. But nevertheless, all these layering of expressions are factual. Most of the romantic music, like let's say Schumann's F-sharp minor sonata, he's the one who chooses among the few to have in that sonata his second theme in minor in the recapitulation, since it's the principal mode, F-sharp minor. The first theme, second theme in the recapitulation is Schumann's. In Mozart's A minor sonata K310, the first second theme is in the relative major, but in the recapitulation in A minor. But Tchaikovsky uses the second theme in D flat major, and then the second theme, second time, is in major, not in B flat minor, which is the key of the principal key. I think most of the time Chopin also uses that in his sonatas. The B minor sonata second theme is in major in the recapitulation. That's something Haydn didn't do. Of course, Haydn and Mozart in the early Viennese school wrote seldom in minor principal keys sonatas. So that's another story. Why? Probably because. And I think it is a factual thing. You can say, oh, it's just formal analysis, it's boring, it doesn't bring anything to my interpretation. But no, it does. Devil's advocate again, as I am to myself, to prove my point. I think you have this luminous feeling. So he keeps the second theme in the recapitulation also hopeful, in contrast to the first theme, which is this wounded hero, dark chromaticism dropping. active cadence towards the cadenza in that recapitulations ending. And I must say that it's very rewarding to play this concerto once you've learned it. Once you've managed your weight, you managed your dramatic effect, and you organize yourself so that when you're married to the orchestra during the rehearsal, your part completes. Of course, it's brought out because you are the soloist, as well as sometimes as an exposition or development. Emerges as an accompaniment, you start understanding that it's not a sonata, even if it's so full of things to play texturally on the piano alone, that there is a concerto, meaning there is an orchestra for the concerto. And that's when you start realizing the real dimension of the piece. It's almost as if it's not an added section that you add the orchestra to the piano. It's all of a sudden the completion starts happening. And you realize how the expression, it's almost like an opera where you only rehearse with the soprano without the bass, and the bass comes at the performance. And you feel like you've practiced all your arias, but in the exchange duos, in the dialogues, in the recitativos, you imagine, but you don't. And once the other energy is there, orchestrated with the piano, like the other singers in the opera, they interact, it becomes so more driven. What a concerto. What a marvelous concerto. My teacher's early years friend, mentor, and admired partner was Raoul Pugnot, who played in the very beginning of the Grieg concerto's life, when it was barely composed, a lot of performances worldwide of this piece, and defended it with great virtuosity. He was a virtuoso, of course. Today we have very few, if not any, recordings of him, because it was before technology allowed to do that with quality, that less with quantity, alas. But he was a firm believer in that expression of Grieg's concerto, which in his time period was the new piece of the day. Everything is new and has been, but yeah, there is meaning to remain throughout time. You can say that fashion is the easiest thing to get out of fashion, because it's ephemeral as the day, as the moment. But then when it remains and you revisit it, it becomes something universal. And I think in that sense, the Grieg concerto remains a universal piece that talks to our psyche of 21st century people. Isn't that a miracle? I find that to be marvelous and miraculous. Could be boring, repetitive, old-fashioned, and sort of not fitting our expression. Perhaps to some people it is too much or not enough, too much rubato, not enough expression, too much expression. Okay, fine. One can always define or criticize an art form, but it is there. And if it connects to you very naturally, or you feel like you have a psychological connection more to this piece than to another, then as a performer you become the right transmitter, the right vibrating membrane that brings the audience to feel like, oh my God, often played, but finally I like it, or not enough played, and I wish I hear it more often. I think that's where the passing to the audience of the essence of music is probably the most important part of the performer's act. Not just to show off their virtuosity, but to be the medium that transmits what they received, to which they connect, and how that connection then has to connect with the audience. The choice of his second movement in D flat major absolutely staggering for A minor concerto. You could wonder why is it so staggering, because if he had done it just one half step lower, would be the relative major. So it's a sort of a relative major up. But I think that matters, because then you feel, after having bathed in this dramatic A minor, you have the movement on number 2 in D flat, and if it was, then you would have it in. It shares more notes with the A minor, since C and E are common to A and to C. But here there's no common notes except the F, but it's not in the tonic chord. So you feel like you're starting something in an exotic tonality compared to the opening movement. Sense of abandonment of the second theme of the Liszt sonata is so clearly the staple of this opening of the second movement, where the aria in a bel canto way is almost unmeasured in its decoration and just drops nonchalantly, bathed in a daydream. Whispered than sung, obviously. And after a brief tutti, he restates it in F flat major, which is in notation rather E major. It seems so far away from D flat major, it's only the dominant of A minor. But it feels like, ooh, where are we? We're home. But we didn't notice it, because we were so far away before. The slow movement comes a chorale, which I like to have nicknamed since always that I know this piece, the anthem of Edvard Grieg, almost like as if it should be the anthem of Norway. It makes to treat the same theme, which was an aria with decorations and harp accompaniment, and chordal chorale-like, and I think with a certain pathos, to say the least, but very beautifully so. All of a sudden it rises from the daydream aria into arises as a statement, I think very much like an anthem. I think that's for me the Grieg anthem, at least in my little psyche inside my head. I always had thought as a child that already, and I still believe it. I find that to be very much of a noble expression of something so daydreamed and in the beginning of the movement. And then the answer with the little romantic era lament. Tchaikovsky's slow movement of the concerto. Logically so, because it's in B flat minor, so it's a relative tonality, but not in Brahms, in Grieg. Oh, getting them all confused now in my brain. Not at all confused. Tchaikovsky. Where the third movement comes, that's where the pianist realizes that Grieg wrote more notes than time to play them. Nothing but the introduction. But you don't want to do the glissando, you want to do the scale of all the A minor through the keyboard. But he doesn't give you 3 beats, he gives you 2. An understanding conductor, you ask him to give you 3 so you can play the full notes. I understand one can play faster, but because of the G sharp leading tone, it's not a glissando possibility. Which then would go overboard the showy factor, descending the harmonic minor with the augmented second. But in any case, the theme starts with the third movement's dance, which is really a dance in 2/2. It's a bit different from the 4/4 of the opening, because it's more stressed to the downbeat. 1, 2. So much so that when he plays in the coda, the introduction, he switches it to 3/4 in major. Not to mention 5 bars introduction instead of 4, which is something to always remember. I will still not know till I die if it's his intent to purposely do so, not the expected starting of the 4th. Or is it a copyist, or is it just a playful, cunning thing that he did? But in any case, you have to memorize it as a pianist, if not, you're lost in translation. But the point is that when he does the theme in 2, And then in the coda in 3, he changes the feel. It's not the same, the dance in 2 or in 3, obviously. It changes not only the amount of beats, but the playfulness of it, the driven or the more elegant, perhaps waltz-like in 3, and more march-like in 2. Not perhaps, for sure. Mozart's C minor concerto's last movement is in 4. And in the coda in 6/8. So that kind of transformation is a rhythmic transformation in the coda gives a sense of blossomed freedom. I mean, something like the third movement of Beethoven thirds. In the coda in major, switches again also to 6/8. So these examples obviously were familiar to Grieg, but I don't think that he necessarily, and I don't know because I wasn't there when he composed it, obviously, and I don't want to appear to pontificate of that's what he meant, that's what he wanted, that's how he thought. I would like to say that is mirroring what I feel from what he brought us to do between regardless of the final tempo of performance, which usually the coda is played faster. One bar a beat, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 3, 2, 3, 4, da 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 da. That's why the group of 4 bars of 3, 4 into in fact 12, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. He writes 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, and you start at 5. This kind of little glitch into it, which I find so touching, amusing, but also scary if you forget when you perform for memorization. You have to remember 5, 5, 5. 2, 3, 4, 5. And the opening, these appoggiaturas on the downbeats, the 2x4, give it a more densely settled, earthy, downbeat accentuation. So I think that he doesn't use always major minor. It's also unsubtle for me to say that. He uses half minor, half major, already Beethoven. And not the way you alter the tonality with ingredients that make it bitter, sweet, sweet, bitter, 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 sweet, 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 bitter. It's been since the beginning of more of the minor mode, where you have the chromaticism colorization in Greek. Gives us a sense of passing through major and minor, combines the two. It's not clearly the one, clearly the other. That's what gives it that, I think, very close to psychologically human emotions, where everything is mixed in. We're not just sad and just happy. Well, perhaps sometimes we are in an unadulterated way, which is beautiful too. As a child, as an idealist, as somebody, oh, it's all marvelous, or oh, it's all so terrible. But sometimes inside the terrible you have hope. Like the first ballad of Chopin. Oh, yes, oh but no. Of course, I purposely just showed this pattern, but when you hear it played as it should be, you go around the path to keep understanding how you establish your minor mode, how you hint the relative major of hope until half diminished breaks down to minor. So how much do you have to state it because he did, the composer? How much do you have to overstate it because you're the performer who feels it and feels like you have to enhance it, highlight it, put more makeup to it, scream it rather than say it loud voice, or cry it rather, or just hint a tear in a smile? Are the different innuendos that you can put into it. And so when you do, there are layers of colorization of the harmonization that I think is the proper usage of the tonal system developed by these composers, which they received as an inheritance anyway. They didn't invent the tonal system in the case of Grieg, but they customize it to their expression. Would it be folkloric from their country? Would it be melodic, harmonic colorization that brings a certain mood, like in the mazurkas? Oh, he doesn't do that, but that's too much. But generally, you can do a lot. Or even Ravel does so much too, to customize the tonal system. Then we can call it modal or partially modal. The opening in A minor of his piano trio by Ravel has these 6/4 in the left hand. But just for the tonic, the rest is modal or minor. Have you heard that? Thankfully he didn't. Or it becomes Grieg. Each of these composers have their signature minor, you could say, almost like this is the Grieg A minor, the Chopin A minor, or Brahms minor. Of course, they all wrote in A minor, G minor, F minor for different reasons that are only their own to know, or some instrumental. But we're not to guess; we're just to say, to serve. But we cannot help wondering, what if you didn't write it like that? And I find that to be a very interesting thing to do. It's liberating. In a way, it makes you play even more precisely, more focusedly, more drivenly, more really, more truly what he wrote. Because you play it exactly like he wrote it, having dwelled around it and try to imagine what if. And I find that very liberating. It's not necessarily something that everybody should do. I don't advocate that as a teacher, but I share this with you as a performer in practicing, in thinking, in nourishing myself from the musical content, the emotional, the psychological content of the piece. So much is there to say, so little is there to keep of the saying, because most of it, if not all, is in the music itself. And practicing it is repetitive. Sometimes it takes away all this mystique all this expression, all what I talk about, because it's so easy to talk about it, but you have to practice to play it. And when you practice playing it, you find that at some point you take away the juice of it, the fragments of it, the meaning of it. It just becomes practicing of clean octave playing and shifting and preparing. Black to white key and white to black key. Here you rise, here you drop. And then a drop of the sixth. So you think all these practical things as a pianist, thank God, if not you would be playing it not clean, and when it's not clean, what's left? Well, not much, but still the essence under it. This kind of Liszt style, Tchaikovsky even because of Liszt, partially, big uber cadenzas where the piano is going as if outside of the concerto. Wild horse. And when you think in the middle of this third movement that is so driven as a dance, and if you he gives you a middle section that is a reminiscence of the mood of the second movement, Again, in this very pastoral mood. F major, like the Beethoven Pastoral Symphony. Anyway, he chooses F major, flute. This intense sound of intimacy, intense intimacy. Piano plays it after the long, beautiful aria of the flute. For the melodic line over the bars, overlapping the stretch of the melodic singing, and the chords of the piano repeated, which the flute doesn't do in the opening of the theme. And the piano reproduces, but immediately after, it carries a sense of pain in these repeated melodic notes that insisting on the tragic appoggiatura minor in the middle of the major, with the dropping chords by thirds of the lament, like in Bach. Book 2, F minor. It's almost an old-fashioned way to describe pain or emotional inner pain, because it's so luminous. And all of a sudden, a cloud. And pianists are afraid to smile to a moment of emotion that expression is tender, because they think it will appear unserious and they have to be organized to play. They're here to industry of playing. They don't. Their playing is the emotion, but they're, yeah, it doesn't matter. You don't have to smile or not to smile. I advocate sometimes to smile if you feel like the music is relaxed expressively, but that doesn't mean much. I think for the audience it does. It makes feel that the audience feels reassured that the pianist is not just worried to play right, but it's also enjoying playing what it is, as if they know he or she is not just enjoying because he or she are playing, therefore it's difficult to do. But it's part of the expression to reflect what you receive. And if it's tragic, it's difficult to smile, and if it's smiling, it's difficult not to. But perhaps sometimes people keep just a poker face and just remain intensely preoccupied face. 2 against 3, the chords, the arpeggio, the building, the dynamics. I can't help it myself by smiling. I haven't played this piece, but I really feel like it grows inside me like a baby. As Boulanger used to say, beautiful music, it is a travel companion through life. I didn't know that then because I was at the beginning of the path. Now that I'm getting towards the close to the end, I feel like it is true. She was right. It's like a child that I'm carrying, if it is, emotionally at least, driven like that. Or it becomes a companion, a friend. Sometimes it bites you, sometimes it hugs you. Sometimes you hurt it and you try to play it right because you want to serve it right. You want to be with it right. You want to hug it right. And sometimes it doesn't help you when it's tricky. This kind of things doesn't hurt to practice. Because if you play them staccato, ta 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 ta, it becomes angry. You do it 2-ha-ta-ha-ta, 2-ha-ta-ha-ta, 2x2. Change finger on the repeated note. 3-4, 3-4, 5. There are things you read, there are things you understand, there are things you comprehend, there are things you practice. And when you play it, you realize in the first rehearsal with the orchestra that 2/3 of it you have no clue what happens with the combination of the two. And this hemiolas in the section that I was just playing in the coda, So Playful, has the entrance of the second violins alone. On the second beat, alone by themselves, in the middle of your rushing, if the pianist doesn't rush, which is not being a pianist, I guess. And nothing but the hemiolas by themselves doing ti-dam, pa-dam, pa-dam, ta-dam, pam-pam. They stress the tempo in the impression of accelerando, which pianists add to it their own rushing. And then when the first violins enter, perfect in 3/4 without hemiola to place that. Well, there is a hemiola embedded in it, but that's another story. What happens is that it's not together. And then you realize that as a concert pianist, you have to be following the entrance of the first violins, watch the conductor hyphenating between the beats of the orchestra and your playing, and trying to slow you from rushing, or you could count yourself to allow not to rush. Ooh la la! And the pianist usually having no third beat to play, they always shorten that rest. When they practice alone, it doesn't really matter. But then when the violins enter, first of all, it's delicate for the orchestra, for the conductor to place these violins together, because in unison, 16 people playing sounds like, because it's not clear the departure. Well, it is a departure on the second beat. The point is not that they cannot play it, it's just that it's an awkward section. So he chose to do it awkwardly in a way, that's his choice of orchestration. But the way it comes, the pianist rushes, the violins start late on the second beat, and then they're not sure where is the downbeat, and it's always this kind of 2 or 3 bars of awkward walking on ice and trying not to slip away. Then once that's finished, everybody plays actually around. What Tchaikovsky does. It's pompous for some people. I've heard many people criticize this kind of pompous ending. I think it's a heightened emotional rise of the spiritual feel, like a chorale for spiritual necessity to elevate ourselves, sing in larger values all together. It brings us all together into some kind of just like in the second theme, second movement, middle section. I meant to think it sounds to me more like an anthem than music of melodic line only. And here is the climax of the whole concerto, because after the 3 movements you finish in major with large, all unison and chordal together, but it's almost like the unison is the completion of the individualities of the soloist versus the orchestra, all together reaching the point by being united. Some kind of expression of, and of course in major, of hope, perhaps redemption. Untitled Cadence. A perfect cadence, which I think is in a way very spiritual, almost like this church legal cadence, subdominant tonic without the leading tone. It gives that sense of chant. Thank you very much.